Hey everybody, hope this finds you doing well. We're going to go over some of the biggest news stories over the past week, but of course, we got to start with the biggest of them all, that is Bitcoin and the price movement. We've seen Bitcoin go back into the $70,000 range. We're going to look to see if Bitcoin will actually be able to hold this range before we can really solidify any type of major upward movement, but at least we are seeing that we potentially have hit a bottom. Obviously, we don't know, time will tell. But we are looking to see what will happen this month. We did finally break the streak of negative months with the month of March barely at the end of March. So we're starting to have a great start to April. So obviously we'll keep you posted on what happens there. But if you look at the pattern of Bitcoin, particularly when you look at the bear market of 2022, you had this massive drawdown over about 12 to 14 months. And we're seeing the same type of drawdown from the end of last year in 2025. So, could we potentially see this chop for the next year? That's possibility going into 2027. But we do know that over time, as investors in Bitcoin and as long-term investors in Bitcoin, we know that if you hold for an extended period of time, you are rewarded with higher returns. Obviously, past performance is not indicative of future performance, but we can use it as an indicator of what the possibility is for Bitcoin. So we like to see that Bitcoin is now in the 70,000 range. Could it potentially go back under 70,000? Absolutely. That would not be a surprise at all. Like I said, there's a possibility that we could have some chop for a while. We see here that we basically had some chop in that $20,000 to $30,000 range for basically about a year or so before Bitcoin really started to get moving towards the end of 2023 going into 2024, and we had the introduction of the Bitcoin ETFs. And speaking of ETFs, one of the largest US banks had their Bitcoin ETF product debut last week. You can see on their first day they pulled in over $30 million, which was about 440 something Bitcoin, and this was their best debut of any ETF that Morgan Stanley has released. And it just goes to show that we're seeing demand is still continuing to come into the Bitcoin space. That's why we're so bullish on Bitcoin, generally speaking, because there's a lot of catalysts that could push Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies over the next several months. Particularly, there's talks of the Clarity Act and whether or not that could potentially be passed in the next several months going towards the end of 2026. That's definitely a possibility as well, which is going to provide clarity on certain assets as to how they're classified and how they can be transacted on the public markets. So that could definitely be something that could move crypto up, but obviously that still is on the floor in Congress, and so that could take some time with different drafts going back and forth. Obviously we'll keep you posted on that. But with regards to this ETF, Morgan Stanley came out with the lowest expense ratio out of all of the ETFs that are out currently. So we could potentially see a lot of flow coming into Morgan Stanley's ETF out of some of the other ETFs. BlackRock, which is the largest asset manager in the world, they have the largest amount of Bitcoin through their ETF, IBIT, and they will potentially see some flow going from their ETF to Morgan Stanley. That remains to be seen. So this definitely will be an interesting metric to see the type of interest that is going into this ETF, particularly because of the lower expense ratio. So we'll obviously keep you posted on that. And of course, Strategy, as usual, continues to buy more Bitcoin. This is another bidder that is going to constantly bid on Bitcoin, and if anything, they're definitely helping to keep Bitcoin at the price level that it is. And they acquired nearly 5,000 Bitcoin last week. By the time you watch this video, there may be an announcement for them buying even more Bitcoin, and they're now using their stretch product STRC, which is their perpetual preferred stock, which gives a yield of around 11.5%. And through this perpetual preferred stock, they're able to raise funds and issue more shares to be able to buy more Bitcoin. So basically, through this perpetual stock, they're perpetually buying Bitcoin. So we can definitely look to see whether Strategy will get to that $1 million mark of Bitcoin sooner than later, and most likely they will. Also, another big story that came out over the past week is that the New York Times published an article about solving the mystery of who is Satoshi Nakamoto. They believe, or this particular author believes, that it is Adam Back, who is who's someone who actually you can see a British cryptographer and leading figure in the Bitcoin movement, but he actually was mentioned in the Bitcoin white paper. You have here the Bitcoin white paper. He was someone that was one of the first to really explore the proof of work system, and it was a product that he came out with called Hash Cash. And so this was part of the basis of the technology of Bitcoin and the blockchain technology that the Bitcoin network is today. And so this particular article goes into why they believe that Adam Back is potentially Satoshi Nakamoto, but he has come out and said that he is not Satoshi. And really, most of us in the Bitcoin community believe it's best for us never to know who the person or persons that is behind Satoshi Nakamoto. And I found this funny. Beeple, who is a prominent NFT digital artist, came up with this artwork, and it's basically a picture of a guy named Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto. He is a Japanese American and was mistaken as the actual Satoshi Nakamoto, the actual inventor of Bitcoin, several years ago. And he came out and said, and said that he was not Satoshi, and there's evidence that he was not Satoshi, but this is what he looks like. So at the end of the day, people in his ex-post said, we are all Satoshi, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter who Satoshi Nakamoto is. Those 1.1 or so million Bitcoin that are spread across a ton of Bitcoin wallets has never been touched, most likely will never ever be touched. Many people believe whoever Satoshi Nakamoto was may no longer be with us. But whatever the case may be, we are very appreciative of Satoshi Nakamoto and the invention of Bitcoin. And at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter who Satoshi Nakamoto is. We're just very appreciative for the invention and for the opportunity to be able to store value given the current climate that we're in and the state of fiat currencies and how they continue to be inflated. We had the CPI, which was released last Friday on April 10th, and you can see here that the consumer price index for all urban consumers increased by 0.9% on a seasonally adjusted basis for the month of March, rising 0.3% in February. Over the last 12 months, the all items index increased 3.3%. So this includes energy as well as food, and so that's considered headline CPI. And so we are noticing, obviously, an increase in prices, particularly when it came to energy. A lot of it having to do with what's happening over in the Middle East. We need to keep an eye on this because it could potentially cause more inflation when it comes to gasoline prices. Obviously, we've seen that hike over the past month, not only with driving cars, but also with airfares as well. And then if that continues to be an issue, then we could continue to see it trickle down to other sectors because oil is needed, energy is needed for various different sectors. And if that becomes an issue, it could form a squeeze for a lot of these companies and cause the prices for various different goods and services to go up even more. So we definitely have to keep an eye out on inflation. Obviously, labor and employment is another key metric that the Federal Reserve also takes into account when coming up with monetary policy. So the reason why we believe in buying commodities like Bitcoin or gold, for example, is that these type of assets hold value, particularly during these type of times, but also they're considered risk on assets. And so when people need liquidity and when people need funds, particularly when things are going up in price, they may need to sell off these type of assets to be able to pay their regular household bills. So obviously, as we've mentioned on X, many times. Make sure that you keep up with what's going on with the macro and economic environment, because it's very important, not only with other investments like equities, but also with Bitcoin as well. It's not immune to what's happening in the macro environment. So it's very important to understand what's going on, at least generally speaking, because it can move markets. So as usual, make sure to keep posted here on YouTube, as well as X, as well as Instagram. We really appreciate you watching. We hope you have a great start to your week. In the meantime, take care. Bye bye.